What we're going to concentrate tonight is the reduced fuel zone, which gets into the strategies in vegetation management as you get farther and farther away from the house. A few announcements. I put the flyer out there summarizing the ignition zone, the non-ignition zone, which is very difficult, quite frankly, because there's a lot of structural stuff in it that I'm trying to keep in the other meeting. And at any rate, that you got it on email, but I also worked it to try to get it in to summarize what was said. I also put a summary over there. Fire prevention is a matter of improving our odds, which sort of summarizes the different locations we've talked about and may talk about in the future. As sort of a guide to that. I also put the minutes for the meeting of the Fire Prevention Committee in April. And as follow-up on that, one of the things was we do not have funding for further meetings. In fact, we need people to chip in the $5 or something today because we're $50 short of the funding for this meeting. It's $150, I think, to rent the hall. And instead of, we've covered the main education issues, but we will be meeting, instead of every 2 months, we'll meet every 3 months. And one meeting would be south of 24, and one meeting would be north. And unless we can get donations, we will find a place where we can meet that we don't have to pay for. Several issues came up at that meeting. One of the problems is the whole issue of getting the word out on education, which the advisory committee is very much in touch with, as this group as is widespread throughout the community. And I think this is a big issue. One step is already being possibly taken. There is a DVD that emphasizes what the advisory district does, but nobody can break the code to access it. And it will be on the agenda at the advisory committee meeting next Thursday for funding from the advisory committee to distribute it to every homeowner in the hills. Delaying this to look for a sponsor and so forth. Also, a lot of good suggestions have come in on taking advantage of different sources. I'll pass out one example that was left on my doorstep. This is this CAL FIRE CDF brochure, which talks about a lot of things that we're talking about. And again, one of the problems is, like, you get this picture of a house with 50 feet of space around it, or 100 feet, which is not quite what we see in our hills. There is interest in, well, the notes are there, I'm trying to remember, there's all my notes in front of me at the meeting, a lot of interest in the Calicut Tunnel area. Committee was formed a preliminary meeting to look into that, and we had a meeting last Thursday. Jim Dexter from south of 24, which I think is very important, is going to be chairing that committee. And at this point, they decided to address the issues, not just of Caltrans property from just the other side of 13, but up to the top of the hill there, but also Oakland property, and also PG&E, which is a main concern to people south of the freeway, of course. Camille Rogers is on that committee. She is now in charge of vegetation management for the fire district, and not working primarily in inspections, but there are part-time inspectors will be coming on in the season, and that's to start slowly. A lot of changes being made under the new chief of the fire department, which I understand seem to be going in a good direction. One of the concerns brought up for possible topics in the future are the water situation and how that would be supplied. Oh, let me finish with the first part of this is trying, on the Caltrans thing, is finding out who owns what. It's not as easy as it sounds. And also to find out what Caltrans is talking about doing, so we can have something to look at and so forth. So this is in process. Just to report from the Hill, one of the things I thought of doing today is bringing a presentation I did to our homeowners. I also did the advisory district about showing how we've been able to implement a lot of these things that are being recommended today. Bill's actually my guru early in the days when I started in fire prevention 10 years ago. And it's amazing when you look at the long time frame how things can work. And we've just, in line with our wet season, dry season, we basically have completed our fire prevention work already as of Tuesday this week before it gets dry. So, with that said, I want to introduce, I think Bill McClung sitting next to me is one of the founders of not only Shelter Builders, I guess you call it, which actually is a vegetation management company, and also with the Claremont Canyon very active in its formation. And I think he's an excellent one to talk about what you're trying to do in the zone with all the variables that we face. And then, let's see, we have Brad Gallup, who supervises the vegetation management for East Bay Regional Parks. John Swanson actually said that Brad's the one that does the management, and that's why he's here. I think I sort of excused Camille today because she's extremely busy with meetings. It's basically a 12-hour-a-day job and so forth. And I think in this regard, we can get on with this. She's just coming into their role. So with that, who wants to go first? And well, I was very open. Feel free to interrupt. I can put if someone would like to sort of take notes about basic strategies up here, whose handwriting is better than mine, you're welcome to do so. Points that are brought up. And we'll have a kickoff and then very open discussion and bring up particular issues that you may be addressing. Okay?
You want to go, Bill? If you wish. Or you, okay. Good evening, everybody. I have no presentation prepared. But I'll just give you kind of the perspective that I'm coming from with East Bay Regional Parks. We do have structures in the park district, so we're concerned with the zone immediately around those structures. And we have a lot of property that borders up to the neighbors, their homes. And we have a lot of wildland areas that don't have any structures, but are still a concern for us. We don't want the resources to burn, and we don't want to get a fire that gets established in the wildland and then moves into the neighborhoods. So a lot of what we do is fuels management in large areas, not necessarily, like I said, not necessarily by homes. And I'm here to, I guess, help answer any questions you have about that, that area. I think your expertise is more closer to the buildings and individual tree species, but I'm kind of more focused on the principles of fuels management and fuel models, that kind of thing. So if there's anything in that area that I can help with, I'll look at. Yes?
I thought I would...
You want the...
I can repeat the question. Why don't I summarize the questions as well?
More of a comment than a question, but I wanted to pay tribute to Jerry Kent, who been a long-time leader for the East Bay Regional Park District. And some of his presentations about the history of trees inspired me and been very instructive to me to learn more about what the area used to be and some of the challenges that we face in terms of vegetation management or trying to reduce fire risk. And I feel that we're moving to a better place at this time with not only the public sectors potentially being able to do more to address fire risk, but also I feel like we work together on some of these issues and come to some compromises, and hopefully that it's win-win for everybody.
Yeah.
And I also feel real good about this meeting. I want to pay tribute to you, Bill, for your long-time leadership, and feel like we've got some of our patron saints here in this room that have done wonderful work for this community. And I applaud the Regional Park District and their kind of long-time leadership on kind of huge areas. And I'm hoping that this is a time that we can kind of get together and harness and move forward to address some of the huge challenges that we face because of the surplus of junky fire-prone vegetation.
Rick, do you want to talk about the City Triangle as a sort of a kickoff starter? What's happening? You can explain where it is too, I guess. Not everybody knows. We do have some people from that area here.
Just remind me if I get not to trip on this wire, okay? So we have several projects going on right now. One of them is coming up later this year at the City Triangle. I don't know if everybody knows where that is, but it's on Skyline Boulevard, near Grizzly Peak Boulevard. So it's about a 30-acre parcel that's in the shape of a triangle, point going down to the west. And we're removing eucalyptus on that site. Eucalyptus only takes up about 13 acres, and we're going to thin that out, get some lattifules out, and some of the small trees. So that's the project that Bob was talking about. And I left a flyer out there for a public meeting if you live in that area, or if you don't, either way, it's a public meeting. We'll be talking about more details on the project.
I want to say a few things. Well, first of all, I observed that this is a highly educated group of people on this subject. So you all know as much as I do about it, or you have your own angles on it. But I just want to remind us of how incredibly important this subject is. And we're talking about the wildland-urban interface. And this is a subject that has been studied extensively, and we know a great deal about what needs to be done. The issue really is doing it and doing it well. As many of you know, there was a major fire in Berkeley in 1923 that burned most of North Berkeley. It came out of what is now Oakland Park. There was a huge fire in Claremont Canyon and Vicente Canyon in 1946. 1,000 acres were burned. There was the fire in 1970 that burned about 50 houses along the ridge between Vicente Canyon and Claremont Canyon, and that started in the Park District. Also, along Old Town Road, the road.
Oh, so it's an arson fire.
It was an arson fire. And then there was the infamous 1991 fire. After the 1970 fire, there was a major study done. It's called the Blue Ribbon Report, which was done at the Park District. And they recommended that zones of 300 feet of vegetation from houses be managed. And to a very substantial degree, that was not done. After the 91 fire, we had the Vegetation Management Consortium study that was issued in 1995, and this is just the technical appendix of it, and it explains how vegetation needs to be managed. And they recommended that there would be 500-foot buffer zones near houses with differential management strategies depending on the distance from the house, the aspect, the slope, and so forth, and the kind of vegetation was there. And the fact is it's like enormously complicated. A single acre of vegetation has thousands and thousands of plants on it, and they're almost all flammable. They are all flammable to some degree, especially when they're dry, when it's raining. And so what to do about it is a huge issue. Early on, I got interested in this mainly by being on the Berkeley Fire Commission when this report was issued. And I was very disturbed that so little of what had been recommended in previous years had actually gotten done. And that's how I got into forming a company called Shelter that did this kind of work. And I tried to do a lot of it myself in the last 15 years. So my knees are too weak now to do anything more of that. So I'm passing my work on to others. But Bob and I are examples of that even old men can do this kind of work. published this News from the Buffer Zone in the in the 1990s, and did about 10 issues of it before I ran out of steam. But I was trying to analyze what the issues were and to what degree we were getting the work done. And in this particular issue, which I brought copies of, there's a description of the recommendations that come from this technical report about how to manage different vegetation types close to housing. And so there's a section on grasslands, there's a section on shrub and brush dominant communities. There are discussions of islands of vegetation that are, according to the experts, acceptable in these buffer zones. And it's really intelligent, thoughtful work by people who knew what they were writing about. So I think, well, another document I brought with me is this piece of the Regional Park District's Resource Management Plan, Wildfire Hazard Reduction and Resource Management Plan, which was issued in 2009. And there's another couple of volumes of this. So again, it's a highly studied subject by experts. And a lot of attention is given to ecological values as well as fire safety values. So in my view, it's an example of judgment and expertise and study being applied to a real problem. And we know we have a real problem with this approximate 20-year cycle of major fires that occurred between 1923 and 1991. The Park District is the big player in this resource management plan. I think there are about 3,000 acres of land that are identified that need to be managed. Are you doing all of them?
Oh, they're all done already. I'm going to retire.
It's a gigantic task, and all tools need to be used, even ghosts, which I do not approve of, but because they are so ruinous on the land. But it's such a big job that all types of tools need to be used, and a lot of human judgment needs to be applied to getting the work done. Most important, the work needs to get done. Now, of course, it also applies to private landowners, and Bob Stevens, Hiller, Group 4, is that right? 5, Miller 5, they have 14 acres of land below the houses at the top of the hill, overlooking Highway 24. It's, I've worked with Bob for a couple of years on this, and it's, I'm amazed that you say, Bob, that it's finished as of this week.
Well, this year's, maybe.
My view is that this work is best done, and Camille Rogers agrees with this, I believe, that it's best done if it's done throughout the year, except in the fire season. That some work can best be done in the winter. Pruning of trees, for example, and thinning of shrubs is best done at that time. And then there's a spring need, which is what you've just been doing, which is cutting the fine fuels and grasses and just laying them down. And then there usually needs to be a summer mowing also, because often between this time of year and August, there's a significant regrowth of weeds and grasses. Well, that's enough talk for now, but
maybe the way to do this, let's keep on burning issues, is to talk about sort of the grasslands thing, the brush, the trees, the relationship of them, and how you do this, as you get maybe starting the first 30 feet from the house, and then when you're getting farther, how you make the decisions, you need to go farther than that, and what special considerations in that house. Does that make sense, Kevin? As sort of a starter? You want to, and maybe we should start with the most obvious thing, which is the mowing, the grasses. How short you get it. I know what we found helpful in our area is doing one cut, like, and that varies every year. This is one of the hard things working with big entities like the city of Oakland and contracts. You don't know when this stuff is going to need to be cut. You don't know when you're going to get a late rain like we just had that changes everything. Or you get no rains, or you get lots of rain. Like last year, we spent a lot of our budget on the grasses because they're 5 or 6 feet high. And how far away from the houses, what's the flame length on that? So, how do you mow it to encourage the native bunch grasses, for example? We've got 5 native bunch grasses growing in our area. We've got hills that were solid grown before, then we're loaded with weeds. And now we've got one hill about the size of this room that is all purple needle grass, which we didn't plant. It just does evolve. So maybe I can open that up about the timing of the grass and how are there techniques you can use to encourage the native plants, native grasses, and incidental, just before I let go of the mic, by doing it twice on rapid growth years. We found the first one we can cut and it lays down to the ground, and it sort of becomes relatively resistant to fire. Initially, there was the order that came down from the top to remove everything that you cut, and that is extremely expensive, especially on steep hills. So this has worked very well for us. Then we go back and we mow the close-in areas, like the first 30 feet or 20 feet on key areas where you know that's where the winds come from, it's close to the houses, and we mow that really short and even raking, as an example. So is that, as a story, you want to mention about grasslands?
Well, I actually think the timing issue is fairly simple, although it varies depending on the rain. But I think to do it well, you need a selective cutting in the spring before the weeds go to seed. And then you need a subsequent cutting to make sure you've got a sufficient reduction of fuels in that zone. I think the zone is certainly the first 30 feet are the most important, but the next 100 feet or so are also very important. I managed for a while the 20-acre Tilden fuel break, which was ranged from about 200 feet of depth to 500 feet in some places, and the whole area needed to be managed. And it was basically a weed management project. And the goal was to favor the native vegetation, the deep-rooted perennials, and to zap the annuals so that the fine fuels get substantially reduced. And that the area remains ecologically healthy. And we hope beautiful and accessible.
I wanted to follow up on some of your comments. I support the cut in the spring and also getting our public agencies to set the proper example, because I can recall a few years ago we would have the fire marshal come in and say, year-round management, that we're going to, have year-round management, that you would wait and you would look for the fire department, and in October would, maybe come and you have to nag the fire department to come in and do that cut in late September or in October. And this year in our recent meeting with Camille Rogers, I guess has gotten a promotion or upgrade in her position. Camille was talking about doing an early cut, and I had been working to try to see if we could get Public Works Agency, in terms of some of their park properties here in the area, to do an early cut and to get the fire department to do a second cut. So it appears that we're making some headway, but there are some years that the grasses would be 3 or 5 feet high, and I just had to get out there and weed eat it myself. And I feel that you do the double cut, the possibility that you can try to keep the grasses to a reasonable level, and you can also control some of the invasives like the French broom. You can see what's there, but if you let it go all year and get to September or mid-October and haven't kind of done your year-round maintenance, I feel like we're all at risk. You know, I feel like we're making progress.
I think there's a question back here. Oh, that's a summary. Go ahead. Yes. And I'll repeat what you say.
All right, I think I can speak loud enough. So I'm relatively new to this. I used to live here a long time ago, but now this is post-fire. So as a new resident, I'm up on Buckingham, near Tunnel Road. And my question is, I guess this relates to what you were talking about, who's responsible for trying to enforce or implement these suggestions? There are, first of all, I looked at the area that's supposed to be cleared between, the house and vegetation, but our houses are up next to each other almost. And so you can't control what's happening in the next yard. Then, in addition to that, there's a lot of vacant lots up there, and it looks like houses burned down and no one rebuilt on them. And the grasses are growing higher and higher and higher. So I understand the frustration. I'm about to retire from academia. And I understand the frustration of working really hard, having reports, and nothing gets done. But I'm at the place now where I say, well, somebody, I think it's us, has to take over and just get this stuff.
Yeah. Well, okay, yeah, we could spend the whole evening on just this issue that we have. I think of course, the homeowner is responsible. Inspections just supplement that. In our area, we go far beyond what's required by the inspections, for example, because it doesn't go nearly far enough. That's just the code. But I think I'd like to sort of talk, what do we want to shoot for? What are best practices? If we get it managed, how do we do it? And certainly, the inspections are coming, but that's what we're trying to get out is knowledge to homeowners about how best to do this. And one addition or comment on what Gordon said, the problem when it gets high is, and you mowed it, so it's much harder to mow. You can't do as good a job, number one. Number two, if you don't want to mow this stuff in September, October, it's dangerous. You start fires, and we've had fires start. It's a wrong time to go in there with a 2-cycle engine that can hit rocks or whatever and start a fire.
I just want to mention that clearly the property owners are responsible. And the agency that checks to see whether they're doing it is in Oakland, where you are, is the Oakland Fire Department. And we have the Oakland Fire Prevention Committee, and several of its officers are here, or its citizen members are here, that finances that inspection system, oversees the management of that. And I think it's extremely important that we have that group, which is paid for by an assessment of property owners. And I wouldn't have gotten into this subject had I not been on the Berkeley Fire Commission and learned what the experts were saying. So we need as citizens to keep that going, and then we need to make sure the fire department does its job of inspecting and enforcement. And I think David, who is the chair of that,
I can repeat what you said.
Bob could say this as easily. The problem is, what happens to the properties when there's nobody being an active owner? And that problem is
the city property.
Well, and the city property is different.
Yeah.
It's property that's privately owned that isn't being managed. And those things, there should be follow-up, there should be cited, and eventually cleared. And we've been working for about 2 years to try and get the mechanism back in place. It used to be one that's not working very well, and it's worked better last year. They started doing some properties. There's a limit to how many they can do, and then try and pick the most egregious problems. So the fire inspection should note the ones where there are problems, and given the limited resources, pick the ones where there's the most danger involved and do that. Your problem up there is, of course, you also bought on parklands and city lands. And those should be managed by the agency, either the city or the parks. And, part of the problem is they have so much area to deal with, they can't always get to things. So the fact that grasses are 4 foot tall here might mean that they're cut down 2 miles further south in the hills. We hope that at least some work's getting done somewhere. So it's all of us sitting on them, going to the meetings, reporting, and us on the committee working with the fire department to try and, sit on them and make sure that, that they're paying attention to the best they can and find ways to fund that clearing of land. It isn't always easy, and liens haven't worked out sometimes, but there is some money being devoted to that now for the first time in a couple of years. Jim Dexter, Bob just mentioned, is chairing this group about the Highway 24 area, has been extremely vociferous and active in trying to get the fire department to make sure something happens about that.
Brad, you want to talk about?
Sure, about that.
I guess maybe you guys can talk a little bit about the scope here. I mean, you talked, Bill, about clearing or managing the grass in a huge big parcel, but it's not just the grass. I mean, if you've just got a big grassland, you've got a different situation than if you have grass that then goes to bushes, that then goes to trees. So if you're looking at a property, a vacant lot next to my house, and it's just grass, and there's no trees, and I don't have any trees, the law is actually that the grasses have to be cleared within 30 feet of a house. Not your house, but a house. So your neighbor, or the property owner of the where there is no house, still is responsible for protecting your house. You can snitch them out, if you will. There is a process to report.
What is that process? I guess that's what I'm...
615-5566. Or, I think that's...
I don't know, but there's many ways.
But if you go to the Public Works, if you go to oaklandnet.com and click on the fire department or put wildfire or Public Works, you can report. And the best way is to take pictures and entitle it dangerous tree, fire danger. Don't just say, I wonder what. I mean, call it out for what it is and get people. Now, at this point in time in the year, people are not they're technically out of compliance because you have year-round responsibility to manage the property. But a lot of the stuff is somewhat green. It's just grown recently. You're not going to get anybody to come out and enforce something right now. I mean, the inspections tend to start in June. It's a little murky.
Well, and it's really not necessary.
Right.
I mean,
we've got wet ground.
Because we have moist summers here and cool summers.
Right.
Really, mostly it's safe for this work done if it's not finished before August.
And if you dig, as we dig into it, I was on the Wildfire Prevention Assessment District board for a while. If you dig into it, different places, from a quarter mile away, have different little mini ecosystems. And if you've got a lot of fog in the summer, that brown grass, ugly as it may be, is decaying, and it is not going to cause huge conflagrations. It's going to lie down, and the rule of thumb is kind of 3 times the height of something. So you get a bunch of grass that's laid down about here. You're going to get a fire like that, and it's going to go along like this. And if there's nothing else for it to catch, it's not nice, it's scary, it's a fire, but it's not going to catch your house on fire. We have to look at the whole system. So your house needs to be safe, and you correct things around your house. And I don't know if you particularly made the one a couple months ago that Bob put on about hardening your house. But and that's why they're zoned. So right next to your house, you really don't want anything that's going to burn. You don't want that holly bush that's going to catch fire, whether it's from inside the house or outside the house. But if you manage the first zone and then the next 30 feet, we can't do it all at one time. And we can't all get frightened and upset about every time we see some grass like that. Because the grass by itself is not the problem. It's the whole, the system, the ecosystem that's out there. So looking out this window, you know, those oak trees are kind of nice. That grass is a little high, little, you know, it's not real high. You get a little fire down at the bottom of that hill, it's not going to catch that oak tree on fire, I don't imagine. I mean, firemen, you tell us. But we need to understand the system of the fire and the ecosystem, along with the governmental systems that we have to deal with to get.
I understand that. The reason I came to this meeting was, first of all, it's advertised as an interactive meeting on fishing. But also it just seems to me, I'm looking around, how many people are here?
Yeah.
You know? And I'm concerned that there's a few real experts, and then there's a lot of people that either are totally ignoring this or
This is why we had a big fire in 1991.
Yeah. So my question is there anything we can do about that? I mean, we have other ordinances that everybody has to obey.
And I think it has to be grassroots within each little neighborhood. And each of us here has to go home and talk to our neighbors and say, you missed a good meeting. UC Botanic Gardens had a big meeting on Sunday. It was, I don't know if it was well publicized. 2 people came. 2! Diablo Fire Safe Council sponsored it, UC Botanic Gardens sponsored it, and they both distributed it to all their email lists that they could come up with. Nobody outside, most people outside this room, it's like that silly cartoon. Somebody else is going to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to try and keep this, just a minute, Gordon. We can complain about inspections the whole night. That's not what this meeting is about.
This is not
And
about.
we're trying to get, this is being recorded as an educational meeting. We're not going to learn anything if we talk about what's not being done. I really would like to get this, I hope you're with me, as to what are the best practices, what would be best to get, so we know where we're headed. And we also have big issues with, that haven't even been addressed here. So, Brad, would you like to?
Sure, yeah. What's your name?
Barbara Goldenberg.
Barbara, yeah. So, I just want to talk about grassland. Like Barbara said, there's different heights of grass and different types of grass, and they all behave differently when there's a fire on it. And I was looking at this site you were pointing to back here, Barbara, that kind of open oak area with the grassland. And that grass looks, like you're saying, like manageable for firefighters. You can get in there, flame lengths might be 2 to 4 feet, depending on the wind and the slope. But when you get the grass that's really a lot taller and thicker, then you're really talking about something that can get killed. Firefighters die in grass fires all the time. That's one of the most dangerous fires we have. Because you get in there and try to put it out, and it can flame up and use very quickly. So I think as homeowners, the grass really is the thing that you really have to watch for, because it can move through there very quickly, and if the wind's right and the slope is right, it can burn your house. So that's something, if I lived in this area, I would focus on the grass first, and like Bill was saying, hit it early before it seeds, and then you may have to come back 2 or 3 times. Keep getting it down, and don't leave a lot of stuff on the ground. Although that's a little bit better than standing grass, it can still burn because it doesn't compact too tight. So you can still have air pockets in there, and that can burn well too. So I guess that's my take on grass. We handle it different ways. We have goat grazing, we have mowing, weed eating, that kind of thing. But either way, it's something we've got to tackle. One of our highest priorities. So, and also, like you said, it can lead into laddering into the brush and the trees. But the fast-moving fires are grass. If it gets in the brush, it's going to slow down.
When you talk about the brush, the ideas of spacing and the horizontal and the vertical spacing and how that works and how it might vary, pending the steepness of the hill and so forth, like you don't want to take all the brush out. What kind of standards do you, what kind of ideas?
Yeah, so, we talk about fuel breaks, and fuel break is not the absence of fuel. It's a break in the type of fuel. So, in some ways, having grassland mixed with brush can be better than just one or the other, because fast-moving fire in the grass, maybe not as intense as the brush, because there's not as much volume to actually burn. But when the grass fire hits the brush, it will slow down. And this is an advantage for the firefighters. Yeah, that will burn hotter, but it's slowing down. It gives you a chance, gives you the time to move in there. So a lot of times we do is we have a mixture of grass and brush, a mosaic, and that actually helps. The intensity is less overall because you do have the lighter fuels, but you can slow it down. You can slow it down by having brush. So I know from your point of view with your house, you don't want a lot of big flames. But for the open area, a mosaic of grass and brush can actually be a better position for the firefighters to deal with. Of course, having very short grass is ideal, but that's not necessarily doable. So a mosaic is good and is actually better for the natural resources or habitat as well, instead of just having a monoculture for one type of plant. So I don't know, Bill, do you have anything about that too you want to say?
I do. I think the word wildfire means a fire that cannot be controlled. Is that right? It doesn't mean wild land fire. It means a fire that can't be controlled. And the fire that can't be controlled is the one that you were describing, like a grass fire that's very fast moving and higher than 2 feet or so. 2 feet. I think it is the fine fuels that cause fires to be uncontrollable. Fine fuels that are organized in such a way that the height of the flame front is large, above 8 feet or something like that. I think that's a rule of thumb, isn't it? That if a fire is above 8 feet in height as it's approaching firefighters, they are supposed to go away, right? And try to hit it from the flank. So the real issue is the fine fuels, and shrubs also have lots of fine fuels in them. So this mosaic that we need, the shrubs also need to be managed. So coyote bush and poison oak and other types of shrubs, they need to be cut down sometimes, not every year, but they need to be managed. You're doing that at Pillar. And the fine fuels that are in the shrubs and in the trees. The understory of an oak tree, if it's not managed, has a huge amount of fine fuel in it.
Just try to respond, if I could, to her question. We're controlling the comments, but I would like to try to respond.
Does anyone want to hear about inspections, or should we concentrate?
Fine, let me speak.
I'd like one more.
Thank you.
Other people would like to speak.
All right, you're able to control it. Thank you.
Yes.
That's his job.
All right, well,
There's some democracy in our group, and I appreciate that. I appreciated your question. I come from an investigator background, having worked for the state for 31 years doing investigations. One suggestion I would have, or a response to your question, is kind of do your homework. You can talk in general, yeah, we've got this problem, but whose problem is it? Is it the city? Is it the regional park district? Is it your immediate neighbor? Or an out-of-country, do your homework and be specific about it. So I think if you know what you're really talking about, then you've got a better chance of solving the problem. If you don't know really kind of whose it is, you're guessing. But if you know who it is, let's say it's the regional park district, well, this man can help you with the problem. Or if you know it's the city, you can call the fire department and you can deal with them. One of my thoughts when I heard your question was kind of what do you do? And one of the thoughts, at least in terms of my neighborhood, I'll just be specific. I have some concerns about my neighbors. And one of the things that I do is I try to identify the problems, find out who's property it is, I try to talk to those neighbors. I also try to bring it up at homeowners associations meetings, because I find in our community, sometimes the homeowners association is like this. They don't want to talk about it or don't want you to talk about it, but it's good, I think, not only to talk to the neighbor, talk to the homeowners association, raise awareness, and see if that can solve the problem. I also have been kind of that you've got to set an example. If you're complaining about them, but your own property is not ready, it shouldn't be do as I say, but not as I do. We have to set the example, and then you'll be in a better situation to talk to them about the problem that you're specifically addressing. If that doesn't take care of it, one suggestion that I would have is we have some very good people in the vegetation management section or the fire prevention section of the city. Talk to Leroy Griffin. Talk to Camille Rogers. Send the letter in, and if you've done your homework, then I think you can get prompt action. But if you're just saying, oh yeah, there's problems in the hills, yeah, they know that, but what specifically are you talking about? Another suggestion I would offer is come to the meetings of the city's wildfire prevention district. Get acquainted with some of the people that are in this room. Talk to them about your concern, and you'll find that you can get a receptive audience. But I find there are very few people that come to the meetings, and that's often problematic. Yeah, you can throw mud, but unless you come to the meetings and become part of the solution, you're almost kind of part of the problem. But I feel that there's also come to these types of meetings, be part of the solution. But that's what I feel would be a way that you can begin to address some of these concerns. Thank you.
Yes, Barb.
Can we get back to, well, I was going to say back to the sheep, but we can't hire goats ourselves. You said earlier it is best to trim the trees in the winter, but we've missed that for the year. And if some of the small trees in the coyote brush and even the interior of an oak are some of the potential problems, is it really too late? I mean, so if you have an oak tree, what should we do with a nice, beautiful oak tree?
Okay, the question is, if you missed it, is it too late? Are you talking to that?
She's talking to
Good.
I have an oak tree, and I'm concerned about the oak tree. And in the winter, you don't want to prune an oak tree because that's when sudden oak disease spreads. And when everything spreads, or now,
Yeah,
you're supposed to
but
wait until
in
the
general, you're not supposed to trim oaks until after June.
after June.
Yes.
There you go.
We've got 20 oaks we have.
So what do we do with our?
After June for oaks, after June for
Yeah,
oaks.
and I don't know what time, in the spring is not the time, but I don't, in the winter, certainly. But then, for many trees, there's the nesting period for birds, and so there's this whole window. I think it's even missing in some of the things put out by the Wildfire Assessment District, that you cannot trim or even try to take down trees at a certain time of year, and this is that window.
Okay, the question is about timing of pruning trees, removing trees. Let's have the experts talk to that.
Oaks in particular.
I don't know if I'm an expert about this, but I've been pruning oak trees in winter, spring, and summer for 15 years. There's such an enormous amount that needs to be done. I think it's not realistic to try to impose these timing requirements on it. So far, we have minimal worry about.
Talk to an arborist. Talk to an arborist, because I think you're giving out misinformation. Ray Gordon, please, an arborist says that yes, you should be pruning. Gordon, please, this time and everybody's today.
Please be recognized, okay?
So I'd like to shift the topic a little bit and ask Brad what the status is of the projects in our zone here that the Park District is doing. For example, in Claremont Canyon, I believe there are 12 separate management areas that were identified in the program there. And some of our sub-neighborhoods of this association, like Panoramic Hill, are extremely vulnerable to fire. And so the issue of whether the fuel break is really maintained near Panoramic or behind Stonewall is a very important issue. I think. I'd like to know what the status of that is.
I'll try it. So the Stonewall area, we do maintain both those areas, Panoramic and Stonewall every year. And I'm actually not the person that's doing that role. That's another fire captain. But he's doing that every spring, multiple times, probably if the grass grows again. So I'm not sure if I can do better than that, but they are on our list every year, and we do get in there and do what we can as early as we can in the season. I know there's a lot of French broom at the top of the hill. He's been targeting that, trying to get that converted to grass. Are you talking about the eucalyptus area too? Or just
Well,
kind of
just in general, I have felt for many, many years
That we're only getting about half of the job done. And I feel that that's probably still true with Claremont Canyon, and specifically those areas that have been identified. For example, below the Panoramic Ridge, there is some work being done there every year. That's true, especially the French broom and some of the goat grazing features up there. But it's sort of minimal, it seems to me, compared with what was recommended by experts over in the various reports. I'm concerned about that, and I know the Park District has a huge amount of work to be done. But I think it's a problem. I mean, it's the same kind of problem as an empty lot that doesn't get managed.
I'm not sure what else to say. If we're
Well,
working on it.
I think the timing issue is part of it. When you're out there, it's easier in the wet season for a couple of reasons. You actually get better footing, which is sort of counterintuitive. That's when those steep slopes are dry that you really slide on. The second advantage is in our situation where we do habitat piles, we cut it and mince it up. It's good when you can do it early and get some rain on it and so forth. It helps it deteriorate. We're not in the Sierra where we have a big freeze. And this technique has worked very well. It considerably decreases the amount of stuff you got to carry off the hill, which is extremely expensive. A third thing is we get a lot of fog here, so that the dry season isn't necessarily the dry. It depends on when you're doing it. If you have like we're cutting grass and it's a real foggy day, we know we can maybe do it later. If you got a hot, windy day, it's a whole different ballpark. If the grass is 4 feet high, you're asking for major trouble. But I think I was out in the hill Tuesday for 3 hours with a chainsaw. There were 3 mowers. And what I did was just selectively pick out some brush and so forth, not the whole thing, to sort of grade some breaks, cut it up, and then they came back a few days later and took care of cutting it up. Because this I'd like to get into too, the brush, for example, the choices I made, I hope they're the right ones. We have a lot of coyote brush. Backwest, and when that stuff gets real big, it's got a lot of dead wood in it. And so what I did is sort of thin it out, but I might cut it 12 inches, 18 inches above the ground to keep the roots in, and then sort of selectively cut different brushes different years. Some of the poison oak we cut one place because it was a solid fire chimney leading right up to these trees that were too widespread to train. And I provided the workers free prednisone when they got off the hill. Gave them prescriptions, they went free. But I think these are sort of choices, just knowing the hill, knowing where the wind's coming through and going through. And that also, we're talking more than that in the brush and so forth.
Well, it sounds like a good strategy. Getting rid of the decorative material first, and then you're actually creating a mosaic of different ages in your brush. Sounds like different heights and ages. So
And also, we don't have a whole bunch of fuel, we have little bits of fuel
Right,
each
pockets,
year,
yeah.
instead of just making a massive pile.
I think it's, like you were saying earlier, breaking up the vertical continuity and the horizontal continuity, which is, what I was trying to explain before was, if you have a variation in a mosaic, it changes the fire behavior in ways that you can get in there at certain stages of the fire. It's moving through and it slows down. It gives the firefighters more time to put the fire out, even though it may be more intense. So it's a little counterintuitive, but it's a principle that's very important to firefighters. So, yeah. You want the microphone?
Does East Bay Regional Park District use goats and
Yes.
sheep?
Not sheep. Well, maybe use sheep in some areas, but for the fuels management area, it's goats.
And why aren't goats and sheep used more often, especially in East Bay Park? And in city-owned areas where, where the slopes are so difficult for people to negotiate?
Well, that's where we have our goats. These are the very steep areas that we don't want people to have to walk in there with weed eaters. And obviously too steep for a mower. But we have a mixture of tools, and some areas we just go and mow it if we can. Some areas we create goats.
And people can hire goats, can't they? They can
Private?
hire a herd of goats, a small herd, like.
I think yes. Yeah. And maybe, I don't know if there's a policy or something against, Oakland against using goats.
Well, somebody
there
said
is-
something that they didn't want to use goats because it would damage the ecology. I think you said that.
That would be me.
Yeah, right. And so, I think if you're weighing getting the grass or brush down to an area that's safe versus the health of the ecology, that probably is better to use goats.
Well, it's a balancing act. So we've got to balance the efficiency of goats versus the damage that they might do. They bring in weeds, from other areas and deposit them there, and so that's a problem too, where they can be destructive. But if you have for us in the Park District, we have a way we can balance different tools. But Bill's got his opinion about the goat stuff. But it is a tool that works, but it does have drawbacks too.
The slope below Panoramic Hill that is above Clark Kerr campus is goat raised every year, and it's very steep, and it's Park District land. And I think it's a reasonable thing to continue to do that because it's clearly a very dangerous area in terms of a fire going up that slope to the houses on Panoramic. But it's devastated the land. It basically, they pretty much kill any perennial vegetation that has root systems. And so what you end up with is weeds, annual grasses and thistles and weeds that grow every year. And then the goats do take care of them. But it's an ecologically diminished zone. So that's why I don't like them. And I do favor humans with judgment going out with tools like weed eaters.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. I think we've never used to go in, and we say hill around, we're just talking about one area. We're not talking about the whole thing. It's the steep slopes facing the freeway that we manage. And we have not had any goats up there, and I think one of the principles here, I think, is you get rid of the bad stuff, the good stuff comes in. And we've seen this in spades, areas that were solid brune and so forth. We have huge areas of purple needlegrass. We have 5 different native bunch grasses thriving on the hill, which is better for erosion, which we have is a major concern in our steep hills. It doesn't burn as much. They've got deep roots. It's easier to maintain. But you've got a hand pull, or maybe very selectively. I think sometimes in some areas there is a huge amount of thistle. You could get it with some Roundup or something before it got spread because of flat leaves. It's very easy to control that. You get a sequence of things coming in. But I think the trouble with the goats is they just eat everything. And the goat herder has to be smart about what he's doing. I think Gordon can quote an experience here where they were over here on the hill down there by the 13 exchange, and they're doing this private property instead of the Caltrans property, for example, and they're getting it down to the ground. And meanwhile, here was this area that had been pretty well cleared of French broom, with lots of seedlings. And just talking to goat herder, it's up here near the houses that we'll be having an experience for, that that's where they really need to be. And the other thing is how long they leave them on the hill. You can leave them too short, and I took a series of pictures opposite 24. We have these vertical patches of broom, and the goats are going through it and everything, and they're very carefully picking out all the grass. And I thought, boy, this is really good. Then I looked at it later, they did leave them on there, and there wasn't good stuff to eat, they ate the broom. But how long you leave them and how you rotate them and so forth, you really have to know a lot about what you're trying to achieve with the goats too. And I think like anything, you need supervision of somebody that's knowledgeable about what they're there for and so forth. Bob, did you have a question?
Yeah, I got a funny question. Would a single pet goat do a homeowner any good for the long road?
You want to make cheese?
One of the areas that I've been managing in the last few years is on Drury Court. Actually, it's pretty close to where you part of the Potter property. Rodney Rogers, who built the house, had 4 goats there, and it's a very steep slope below that driveway on Drury Court, and they completely devastated that slope. And so it was all weeds when we started working. So we've been gradually over the last 5 years trying to encourage what few native plants and perennials we're growing. So the problem with the goats is that they're just eating things, and even if it's only one, they'll probably too intensively eat whatever it is. They also strip young oak trees, killing them off. Yes.
Short comment. I thought goats sometimes have their place, but sometimes they'll leave a huge patch of like French broom. And we have a lot of steep areas here, so they're good at least when you can't get people up there, or you can't get the public agency maybe to work on the steep or the big area. They can do a big area, but one of the things that I feel is that sometimes we need the people, like the shelter belt, that's going to potentially go in there and work on a steep slopes. Like Caltrans, for example, if it's more than a 45-degree slope, we've got to have ropes or we would violate the Cal OSHA rule. But in some cases, we need to, let's say, almost have a shelter belt or have a Gordon Piper that'll go up there and get the French broom off of that. Because goats don't always get the taller French broom off of that steep slope, and we've got a lot of kind of, be it public or many times even private properties where they're not maintained, be it by the public agency or the private person, and you need almost sometimes to go in there with your loppers or your chainsaw and take the broom out, and the goats then can, like on this hillside, Bob's comments were good. If you get an effective goat herder that gets them where they need to be, they can help, and then you can see kind of what you need to do. Maybe the broom that's left, then you go in there, or you get somebody with a chainsaw, you get a day labor, and you take that broom out, and hopefully then the goats can do their job. Thank you.
Yes, Peter.
Well, I think we're facing a dilemma here I haven't heard an answer to yet. And I think it's the thing, this big brouhaha of FEMA not funding UC and therefore stopping all these projects. The single question that FEMA had to UC was, it's all very well to take out this stuff, but what replaces it, A? And B, is that more fire safe? So we can take out the broom, but what replaces it? Baccaris? Baccaris burns just as hot and fast as the broom. So you haven't solved it. And in terms of cutting it all down and then allowing it to go to grass, grass is the most dangerous fire because it travels quickly, it changes direction almost instantly, and it's the thing that kills the most firefighters. And so we haven't solved the problem. I mean, we can tear out the broom, cut down the trees, but we haven't solved the fire problem.
But the other piece is follow-up maintenance. And that's what we can work on. We can work with the public agencies and we can work with the private agencies, whether it's public or private property. Yeah, you can take it out, but if you do the follow-up maintenance, there's going to be less to do and you'll reduce the fire risk. So recognize that. The public agencies are trying, but if you tie the hands of the public agencies, don't let them do their job, then you've really got a problem and we're all at risk.
Okay, I think, go ahead.
The key word is reduction. We're talking about fuel reduction zones, and all vegetation is fuel. So it's true that, you know, if you take out French broom, you're going to get some other kind of shrub that will grow there, poison oak, ivy bush, other things. They all have to be managed. We have to have these zones that are managed.
No argument, no argument.
And I
Yes,
think
Brian.
a
Don't
lot
just
of
be a
us,
critic, we're out there to do it.
a lot of, I mean, we've spent a lot of the last half hour or so talking about the management of big parcels of land, whether they're, whoever, regardless of who owns them. But I think a lot of us are really interested in the micro side of our particular neighborhood. And I have great hope that we can get UC Botanic Garden involved in helping solve this problem for the homeowner, for the neighborhoods, and help us learn through the landscapers and so on what can be planted, what is not. None of it's safe. I mean, you want your paved paradise if you want it completely safe. But with a thoughtful look on what's natural, what's native, what's reasonable in our Mediterranean climate, what works and what doesn't work. And so the principles of getting the dead materials off, of thinning out your trees, of thinning out, not creating crowns of things on your property, but, people went in years ago and planted a big long line of plants for privacy. Well, take out every other one, see what it looks like. Have space between things and have areas. I mean, for stuff to burn, you need fuel, you need air, and you need an ignition source. So the grass may be the ignition source, may be what gets to your bush, but if your bush is all airy and open and pretty damp to start with, it may not carry it up there. I mean, the grass comes along and dries out the bush, catch the bush on fire, right? I mean, that's how the fire bat works. The little stuff comes along, dries out the big stuff, so the big stuff, the next size stuff ignites, and then it dries out the next one, and that ignites. And that's what we need to learn, and pass the words around amongst our neighbors. Through the city of Oakland, you have unlimited chipping and unlimited waste pickup, as green waste pickup every week. A lot of people don't know that. And I think those are the things that we can do, which is spread out the information that we take. And, have a chipping party. If your neighborhood per se is scary, and a lot of them are, meet about it. Walk the neighborhood. If you've got elderly people in the neighborhood who can't do their own thing, come up with a plan for the other people to pitch in. It's all well and good. I mean, a lot of us can go out on the public lands and the big spaces, but we can do it in our own neighborhoods too. I mean, just because there's a property line, I think we don't assume that our neighbors know what to do. I think as we get educated, we pass it on and educate and not sit and whine about the big problem. If all the neighborhoods get a little better and a little better and a little better, then it makes it easier and less likely to have a really big problem. If there is a problem that starts either in a house, it's not going to spread through the neighborhood, or in the wildlands, it's not going to spread into the neighborhoods as quickly.
So let me answer a few questions, Peter. I've been doing the fire prevention by guidelines for 14 years and learned a lot in the process of it. And each little direction you face, each little steepness of the slope, each one is different. And we took 30 cubic yards dumpsters off the hill. We also left at least that much on the hill where we cut out. I'm talking about the French broom. And there's a progression. In those areas now, we're having native bunch grasses growing, we've got oak trees growing up, small oaks, we got all kinds of good things. But it took 14 years, and thinning out the stuff and keeping it from coming back. We haven't been cutting trees. We did a little thinning where we have some tree trowels and stuff like that when they're too thick together. And we managed the coyote brush and so forth, which actually broom hides in the coyote brush. The two go together. There's a progression. I don't know if you see it in the parks where you get the broom, you get the coyote brush, the oaks hide in the coyote brush, and then eventually the laurels take on over the oaks. Is sort of a natural progression. We have all these things going on, and in those, in the areas where they were so dense you couldn't walk through, when you come up Miller Drive and then there's a place between the willows at the bottom and the top, you would know unless you went in there. We mow that every year. And we mow that area, and that's a southwest facing slope. So we mow it once, and that keeps that open. In the area that's northeast, where we've been working particularly hard the last 2 years, I think we spent $20,000 there. And we have thinned out a lot of brush and even elderberry trees, which are native, but they're extremely flammable. But they have blackberries, native, but growing all over them. We cut that stuff down, and it's because it's northeast facing, it keeps moist. We don't have a problem with broom in that part where it was broom. It's like a meadow, and we have good stuff growing in there, but it's selective. It's not just a one size fits all. And
well, I totally agree that what Gordon is saying, what you were saying, that maintenance is key.
Absolutely.
But in the greater picture, maintenance takes money. And what I don't like to see is money diverted into other things under the name of fire mitigation, which is not fire mitigation.
Well, I agree with, I think the broom, I'm a pessimist about a big entity, and I'm curious what they're able to say about these big parks. You can't schedule this stuff, and without maintenance in the first place, do no harm, like the Hippocratic Oath. If you just go there and cut the stuff, and you can't use Roundup on it or herbicide, and if you can't dig it out, it's going to grow back just as high in 3 years. It's a complete waste of time and funds. I agree with that. Okay, right?
Thank you. You have 2 minutes.
I mentioned earlier the presentation by Jerry Kent, and I would encourage you to talk to Jerry, or maybe we could invite Jerry to give that presentation again. But one of the things that really impressed me, I heard him talk at the Montclair Presbyterian Church, talks about the history of tree planting here, where in the early 1900s, developers planted 2 million trees, and basically the wrong kinds of trees in this area. And it used to be, maybe 5 or 10% trees, and we went from 5 or 10% to a high percentage of trees. And this was the scheme of the developers to get rich quick. And it left us with a unique problem here in Oakland. The public agencies have been trying to work on, let's say, some vegetation management in the aging forests, but because of some of the lawsuits and litigation, or for example, the city right now faces the federal government saying, well, if you go in and maintain an area, or you go do cutting that you haven't maintained before, and because of fish and game and the protected species, we'll sue you for millions of dollars. So our fire department is a bit skittish about doing some maintenance, including some of the areas potentially that you may be talking about, until the environmental studies are completed, until this threat that we're going to come sue the socks off of you, whether you're the city or the state. The feds have kind of almost intimidated I would say the state, the regional park, and the city from working on those aging forests. And I think for your group, it's important to hear Jerry's presentation, inviting them to talk about that, get a perspective in relation. Basically, I think we're all at risk, no matter what you say about where the fire comes, because of the aging forest and the lack of maintenance.
Or you don't need a microphone. Well, you don't need to be heard. Thank you, Bob.
You're yelling.
No?
Yes, please, Gordon. We
Okay,
had
well,
enough.
I'm hard of hearing, and I apologize for that, and if I yelled at you, I apologize.
Lynn.
I live at Alvarado in Gravatt, and I lived there for 38 years. So I was here during the fire. Our house didn't burn. Stopped it, eucalyptus trees up the street. The eucalyptus trees didn't burn. There were several very large eucalyptus trees in our neighborhood that did not burn. Across the street from us, just where the hydrant was, there was a whole row of oak trees, which I guess Bob and Bill and others would call good trees. And they burned right down to the ground. And, there was some underbrush under them and grass, but they burned. And across the street from them, on the other side of Gravatt, on the corner, there were lingerie pines, and they didn't burn. So I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, I guess, it doesn't matter if a tree is native or not native. If all trees will burn, if the wind is right or wrong, if the wind is wrong, and
The understory.
and there's an understory, and you're on.
But what burned in the fire was houses. The
That's right.
primary fuel in that fire
Yes.
was houses.
Yes.
So we also have 2 million trees here that other people don't
It
have.
was houses and polyester and
2 million trees.
plastic, and the trees didn't burn.
Well, also when Miller Islands caught fire very early, houses are a lot worse than trees. You have PVC and lead batteries, you got all the stuff in the car going up. And once the houses get going, it's pretty good, right?
Gotta get
Anyway,
the costs off the
do you
city
wanna-
and the state and the regional park district so that they can work on those aging forests, those 2 million trees that haven't been maintained and still aren't being maintained.
Do you have any closing comments on things you have to target specifically in these big regional parks?
I can talk about eucalyptus if you want, since we're on that topic.
If you want, or, which I agree, it depends on the individuals.
Good luck.
Quiet, Gordon, please.
No, I'm interested in what he has to say.
So I agree that everyone agrees that really any kind of vegetation will burn under the right conditions. And what we do in the park district is we're looking at the areas that are in this plan that was put together, wildfire hazard reduction resource management plan. And we prioritize some of those areas, and a lot of them are eucalyptus groves, and it's not because that's the species, it's because there's a lot of dangerous fuel in there. There's a lot of fuel in the ground and a lot of ladder fuels. And so that's what we're looking at. If we had a situation with another tree species, we'd be looking at that as well. But that seems to be the one that's very prevalent here. And a lot of the work I do is thinning out eucalyptus groves and getting the ladder fuel down and trying to get the small grass to grow, short grass to grow in among those trees, just like an oak woodland would be. So anyway, I'm not condoning, I don't love eucalyptus or hate them. I'm just looking at the fuel on each site and really saying what do we need to do there on that site. And a lot of times it is eucalyptus because there's so much fuel in there. So anyway, that's all I have to say about use.
I think doesn't it depend if they were the trees that were killed in the frost and came back with all the sprouts compared to the ones that are the nice, that have grown up?
Well, we have, so there's some areas like you're saying that I guess in the early mid-70s there was a freeze and a lot of trees were cut and sprouted back. Some of those areas, depending on the site, are pretty open. They have a stump, what used to be a stump, and maybe 5 or 6 10-inch or 12-inch diameter stems coming out of there. But those are spaced 15 feet apart from each other. That's not necessarily a big issue, but in Tilden Park we have some really old stems of eucalyptus. They're so much worse than that because they've just been dropping all their branches for years. They're piling up, and there's so much fuel in there, you just have to
I seem to
trying to care of it.
recall that after the 91 fire, we had lots of experts from around the world, and the Australians came in and, if my recollection is right, said they measure their eucalyptus forests by tons of stuff, because they drop so much, different species, different things, and you can't keep it pristine. I mean, you can in your own property pick up all the junk. So could your neighbors, but they probably don't. And that, I don't know what the frequency, whether you have to clean it up every 3 years, every 5 years. I don't know how you manage the tonnage per acre or whatever. But it would seem to me that the metrics on that, especially compared to Australia where these trees came from, would be worthy of doing. Instead of just,
There is the Vesta report in Australia.
but we don't do it, is my point.
Actually, I looked at the Vesta system
Okay.
last week on the computer, and I was trying to understand that
So
better.
do we use that?
I don't use that yet,
approach?
no, but we do use like photo series
Uh-huh.
to estimate fuel load and to get an idea of comparing the before and after. And that's kind of how we guide our work. And some of those eucalyptus groves have never been treated.
So we know that.
So we have 80 or more years of
But if we pull
accumulated
out
fuel.
all that stuff,
It's expensive and it's a lot of effort, but we're starting it.
What the Australia Vesta program showed by actual experience in the field was that the main element that decided the seriousness of the fire and whether or not it crowned was the ground fuel. So if you control the ground fuel, you got it taken care of. And so that's the bottom line of that area. That's the best report in the world.
And I think ground fuel also means surface and ladder fuels too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we're targeting.
But if you've got 2 million trees and they're planted on 10-foot centers, even if you control the ground fuel, you're going to have a problem.
Well,
The trees are not a problem.
It's a combination because it's a combination, and each site is different, and we only have so much money, so we're targeting like critical areas and critical parts of this forest, and we can't take everything out, and we can't even take out most of everything. We're just gonna target the really bad areas first.
Is the stand of eucalyptus trees behind the Clark Fair campus, the major stand of eucalyptus trees on Park District land behind the Clark Fair campus, the understory there is, in many areas, pretty well managed, and it includes pile burning of branches and bark and that sort of thing, and then other parts are not so well managed, but it is definitely possible to manage a eucalyptus forest so that you have a kind of low probability of a crown fire. If you have a crown fire in a forest, it's a major event.
Yeah, we've actually thinned out very gently trees, including, we had 19 trees 2 years ago, most of those were oaks, by the way. They were failing. The original landscaper planted them all about 15 feet apart, even 10 feet from the houses, which gave us a huge, I'm talking about live oaks after the fire. And they had extra seeds that went right next to decks and everything. And after the 2008 fire, we had no problem getting those removed quickly. But we picked out the poor ones, we broke up the crowns, and then we particularly managed the brush around it. And underneath them, with a northeast facing slope, you don't get a lot of, we took out the initial room, and it's relatively easy to maintain it because it needs a lot of sun. You go up to the fire road up by the PG&E towers over there, and you'll see broom along the edges of the fire road, but there's dense vegetation up there. I'm not talking about the rest of the hill. And you don't see nearly as much broom. When I was in Italy, driving through Tuscany and so forth, doing some photography and so forth, they got broom all over the places, but it's along roadsides where it gets the sun, for example. And I noticed, I was doing a study for sudden oak death. I took the course and we're collecting samples on 24 trees and sending them in to see. And it's interesting, of course, where we have the laurels are really thriving. Even when they have what looks like it on the bottom, and nothing grows underneath the laurel, for example. So one of the things, when I was out in the hill a few days ago, I would cut the shrubs near the trees and leave the ones in between to sort of help with stuff like that. And we removed many elderberries because that was around the ring of the oaks, and they are extremely flammable. In the 2008 thing, they just turned into charcoal. They get a lot of dead wood in it. So it depended on the tree, what was happening and where they were. I think you got to be very selective. But again, taking the stuff from underneath the trees and the ladders, and the trees they get the drip and so forth. They once you get ahead and maintain it, they'll do a pretty good job of maintaining the environment. Okay, go ahead, Bob.
I don't know if this meeting covered the theme that you started off with, which maybe is a little disappointing. But I'm of the opinion that the biggest threat to my house is my neighbor's house. And my house is also the biggest threat to his house. I have pictures of after-fire situations that show whole communities that burn house from house to house. And the vegetation around these houses did not really get a major impact. And I see that condition, at least in after-fire photographs, occurring time and time again. So I think it's very good, and I believe in the concept of removing grasses and fines around the house. But I think what we fail to address is the greatest threat of all, the neighbor's house, or my house to his house.
Well, it's all fuel.
Well,
It's all fuel.
No, it isn't all fuel.
I think
The house is, and so are the trees. They're all fuel, they'll all burn.
I think you're right, Bob, is the point. I think when we talked about trying to make the house at least resistant to embers, and I think one of the speakers was talking, if a house burns 30 feet away from you, and you have nothing in between, your house will catch just by the heat transfer. And so that it is a problem. Unfortunately, the houses here are built close together. And I think, but it's a combination of all things. Given the landscape we have, at least trying to get the fire to get to the house, reducing the odds, basically. But you're right, so once the houses go up here, for example, on the Bella Highlands, they're all going to go this stuff. So the idea is to try to at least reduce your chances of igniting in the first place with reasonable precautions. But we had, at the 2008, there were a couple of trees between houses that were 10 feet apart. The trees singed and didn't hurt the houses. They may have protected the houses in some ways. There have been cases of that happening sometimes, certainly. And the guy who gave the talk, even that you saw talk over from Richmond. Anyway, so it's a little bit of everything, you know. It all depends on the specific situation. There's no
I'm going to call it the double whammy, because you got the 2 million trees and you got the 2 million houses. We've got the wildland-urban interface, and we've got the worst of both. We've got the 2 million trees, and we've got houses on top of each other. When we were rebuilding, I thought it was better when we didn't have a million houses up there. But we have the double
population
whammy
of
here.
your area just jumped. Do you have a wrap-up?
I want to say we actually got the best of both. We have this wonderful place to live with these great houses that we're privileged to live in, which are all flammable. And then we have this amazing vegetation around us, some of which we planted near our houses and some of which grows naturally. And that's beautiful. I mean, it's wonderful. This is all a management issue. And I mean, managing the 20 acres of the Tilden Greenbrier was a great pleasure because it was like such a wonderful place. There were pathways running through it where people were walking and jogging. There were people painting the trees. It was a park, and it needed to be fuel managed. So I think what we're talking about is and Paramount Canyon's that way too. Panoramic Hill highly vulnerable to fire, including the housing stock, which is extremely flammable, I would say, enclosed together. But it's a magnificent place, and the vegetation around it is great. It just has to be managed. And it's a big job. I've said that a few times, but I want to keep saying it. It's one of the things this society has to do. And it's a good thing to do. And not just for the safety factor.
It's like speed limits. My conclusion is they both can kill you, both the houses and the trees, and the houses and the trees. If you got them too close, they can kill them. So be aware.
Thank you, guys.